Okay. I believe Exona went over the reminders already. If you have not activated your text accounts yet, please do so. You should have received an email today sometime around noon. If you didn't, check your spam. And if you still can't find it, let us know. We can resend it to you. Those will be your stipend cards. We just ordered them today. You should have them in the mail in, I think they say 7 to 15 business days. Hopefully it will be a little bit sooner than that, but that will be tied to your attendance and all of that good stuff. If you have any questions, let me know in Slack, and we can go from there. Headshots will be tomorrow, totally optional. If you do want them, obviously you need to be in person for them. We will be in Riley Hall 445, which is the computer lab next to where we were last night. So if you would like to get your headshot, come to class tomorrow. With all of that said, we are going to start a tradition around here, which is to do stand-up. And the reason why we do stand-up is because it's a very common thing in the software world. So if you get a job in technology or in a lot of fields, you do what's called a stand-up. And that's usually 3 questions. Sometimes it's dependent on the company that you're doing it at. Some companies or teams add questions or take a couple away. But the main questions you ask in a traditional company stand-up are, what did you accomplish yesterday? What did you get done? What did you cross off your to-do list? What are you feeling good about? What are you setting out to do today, right? What are your goals? What do you think you'll get done today? What do you think will spill into the next couple days? And then the most important question out of all 3 of them is, do you have any roadblocks? Are you waiting to hear back from someone? Is there something holding you up? Do you need help from your fellow team? And those are the 3 core questions of stand-up. Now, you may ask, why is it called stand-up? Well, it's called stand-up because every company is encouraging you to get through it as quickly as possible, because these meetings are notorious for taking forever to get through. People, saying, oh, well, I started on this yesterday and then I got held up here, and then someone will ask a follow-up question for it, and then it just goes off the rails. So the way these companies try to solve that is they said you have to be standing up when you give your report, because when you're standing up, you feel that pressure, right? You want to get the attention off you, you want to sit back down, you want to move on to the next thing. And so we won't be following the stand-up rule, right? Because most of us are virtual or shifting to virtual, and that's okay. But what we'll be doing at class is at the beginning of every class, we'll be doing what we call a modified stand-up, right? So we're going to go over what did we learn yesterday. And that's really just a brainstorming activity, right? We throw out some terms we may have learned, some activities we may have done. That's kind of our icebreaker at the beginning of every class to say, all right, where did we have our light bulb moments? What started to make sense? Where are we at? Then we'll do a quick rundown of the agenda, because I personally hate just being taught something without knowing where we're going, right? And so that part of stand-up, what we'll be doing is running through kind of what's the plan for today, what are we learning, what's coming down the pipeline, and then we'll go into any roadblocks, right? And at the beginning of class, you probably won't have any, but that's okay, right? If you're struggling on a concept, throw that out. Or if you're not comfortable coming off mute and contributing that, throw it in chat and we can touch on that a little bit. We can review on that. And if you really aren't comfortable with it, fill out that 30-second feedback form, because I'll review that before the beginning of the next class, and we can spend the first couple minutes of class going over that. Any questions on stand-up before we dive into it? Yeah, so you don't actually have to stand up for this part. That's just like the traditional name of it. And the reason why we do it is because one of the most important things when you're interviewing is, do you understand what we call the 9 to 5, right? And a lot of companies are now moving away from that 9 to 5 time structure. But one thing that I think is super important when you're interviewing is, all right, if you get this job, do you actually understand what you would be doing, right? When you roll in on the first day, what's it look like? What kind of team members are you going to be working with? what's your time allocation? Because I know all of you have worked, or most of you guys have probably worked a job, and those jobs are very different, right? Working at McDonald's is going to be very different than picking up the trash, right? Two completely random job examples there. And sometimes it would be more beneficial to know how you're going to be allocating your time and spending your time if you knew that in an interview. And so because most teams do a stand-up, that's something that we'll be doing in class. But I like to know, hey, how much time am I going to be spending in a meeting, right? Some companies are very meeting oriented, and you could be spending half your time in meetings, collaboration. Sometimes you'll say, oh, well, we spend a bit of our time in quality assurance and doing testing of software. Then we spend a quarter of our time with a team, and the remaining 50% of the time you're out writing code. And so anytime you're in a job interview, you read that job description, that can be a great question to ask in that interview of, hey, say I'm hired starting tomorrow. How does your team spend their time? What's a week look like working at this company? That can be really beneficial to know kind of what you're getting yourself into. And so the reason why I bring up that 9 to 5 is because most teams will do either a daily stand-up just to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page. Everyone knows what each other is working on, what's coming down the pipeline, most importantly, where they may be roadblocked. And then also kind of understanding how that stand-up fits in. So some teams will do it weekly, some teams will do it every other day. Daily is definitely the most common. And so we'll just get into that routine a little bit, get the juices flowing at the beginning of class of, hey, what did we learn yesterday? So if you are remote, feel free to come off mute and just throw out what we learned yesterday or what we worked on yesterday. If you're in person, the mic hopefully will pick you up over here, but I might repeat your answer just so everyone remotely can hear it as well. So let's do our first stand-up. What did we learn yesterday? What did we do yesterday? What did we accomplish yesterday?
Reviewing some of the core terms.
Yeah, so we started learning some core terms. We started going through Canvas, right? We started looking at all of these different links and understanding how they all fit together between the assignments and the optional homework and the weekly quizzes. We got all of those resources together. Those one-on-one links, super important. Asma?
I've also learned that most of the terms that we learned, they go into a lot of categories. So they break into different categories, and some are redundant, so they appear in more than one category.
Absolutely. Starting to realize that we came up with, what, 50 or 60 different terms yesterday, and realizing how they kind of all fit into this Venn diagram, right? This overlapping circles. Now, obviously, not every program language is the same, and that's totally okay, right? There are certain programming languages that excel, and there are certain programming languages that work together, right? So HTML and CSS, those two go hand in hand. You can't have CSS without some HTML. So it's kind of a little reassuring to know, hey, out of all those 50 or 60 things that we threw out there, we can start categorizing them. So on Thursday, we'll be at OpenHack, and you're going to start to hear some of the terms on that list and some of the terms that you've never heard before. It's totally okay to ask the person, like, how does that fit in, right? What is that programming language used for? What's something that you like about that programming language? Those are all great questions for, when you hear a term that you don't know, one of the most empowering things you can say to someone is, I don't know, followed by, let me find out. So I personally, if it were my first open hack, I'd have either my phone on me or like a little notepad just to jot things down, because at the end of the night, you're going to be like, whoa, what just happened, right? And you're not going to be quizzed on it. I'm not going to ask you, who did you talk to or what did you learn or anything like that. But there are going to be things that come up that you're going to be curious about, that you're going to want to do a little bit of research on after OpenHack, and just learn how it fits together, right? that will become more clear as the program progresses. So no big deal if you're doing some research and you're like, I don't really know what this means. Over time, that exposure will become more beneficial. Anything else from yesterday that kind of clicked? Anything that we learned that really made a lot of sense? Okay, so now we move on to, well, what are we doing today, right? Oh, sorry, saw someone in chat. Difference between front end and back end. Yes, that's definitely something that we'll be focusing primarily on the front end for the first half of the class. But in the second half, we get into servers and databases, and we start building our own APIs, right? Our application programming interfaces. But oftentimes you'll hear this term full stack, and that's what you're learning at this curriculum. And you're like, well, what is stack? A stack is just puzzle piecing pieces of the front end with pieces of the back end and pieces of the database all kind of together. So you may, the stack that we're learning is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, Node.js, Express, and Postgres. All of those components kind of mesh together, and day by day, we will learn a little bit more of the stack, and then your final capstone will be taking all of those different pieces of the stack and puzzle piecing them together for one final operational project. Which, if it sounds like a lot, it is, but don't worry, we've been doing this for a while. We will get through it together. But you can substitute pieces of those stacks, right? So you may hear someone using HTML and CSS tomorrow, but for example, Mike Vormwald, who is the organizer of OpenHack, is a big Ruby on Rails guy. He works for a company called Stitch Fix, which is fully remote. And they're like they pair you with like a clothing design, or not clothing designer, but a stylist. And the stylist like picks out clothes for you and then ships them to you, and whatever you like, you keep and pay for, and whatever you don't, you send back to the company. Well, anyway, they are a Ruby on Rails company. So they still use HTML and CSS to build their front end, but instead of using JavaScript on the back end, they use something called Ruby on Rails, which is written in Ruby. And then Rails, Ruby on Rails is the framework that they use that connects the database and everything that's on that side. So the stack is kind of interesting because you can puzzle piece it together. And that's just the web developer stack, right? If you were developing a mobile app, the front end language that you use wouldn't be HTML and CSS. It would be something a little bit different. So the stack is basically taking those different languages, those different tools, using them together, and building our final web application or mobile application or whatever it may be. Anything else of what we learned yesterday? We looked about at the big picture. Yes, thank you. And that's something that we'll be continuing to look out through the entire week. So I'm actually going to use that comment to transition us into what we're doing today. So we're going to start out with a project that we're going to be doing over the next 3 days, 3 class days. We're going to be working on it today and tomorrow. We'll take a break at OpenHack. If you guys want to work on it as at OpenHack, that's totally great. We're going to kind of set us all up. And then on Monday, we're going to review what you guys have done. So we're going to break out into groups. That will work virtually as well. We'll break out into those groups probably tomorrow, and we're going to go through what it would take to design an interface for a car. And so we're going to go through those requirements in just a moment. Then we'll take our, depending on how long that takes, we'll take our break. And then when we come back, we're going to do kind of rapid fire through a couple different things. We're going to look at job titles and how those job titles overlap with what we learned from the stack. We're going to talk about project involvement and stakeholders. What's it take to get a software project off the ground? We're going to touch on imposter syndrome. I know about a quarter of you guys, maybe a little bit more, have already done the required reading for this week. So you might have a leg up on that, but we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, what that feels like, what that means to you guys, and know that you're not alone when those feelings come up. We're going to talk about rubber ducking, which is always really fun to know, to see if anyone knows what rubber ducking is before they get that explanation. We're going to talk about what it means to celebrate different errors. That seems a little crazy, but Exona touched on that a little bit yesterday, but sometimes an error is actually a really good thing, and it's trying to help you get rid of itself. So we're going to go over that. And we're going to go over kind of what it means to be an engineer. You guys have seen this job title, right, of software engineering. So what's it mean to be an engineer, and how do we think like one? How do we take that approach into computer science and really build something with it? And if we have time, depending on how class flows, we may also go over the software development lifecycle. So that's what it takes, kind of all the phases it takes to pull off a software project. Any questions of where we're headed, what we're about to cover? Okay. Hopefully you don't have any roadblocks, but we always ask this question: do you have any roadblocks? Are you confused on anything? This could be something as simple as I can't get into Canvas, I need help with my login, to I'm about to throw this computer out the window, I'm really frustrated because I don't know how to do this, all the way to, I don't know, I'm having some troubles on Zoom, or yeah. No, yes. Okay. See me either at break or after class, and I can give you your login. And this goes for anyone remotely as well. If you are having troubles getting into Canvas and you are in Slack, just shoot me a Slack message. 9 times out of 10, the Canvas trouble is not knowing your username. Your username and your email are not the same. And I think on the login screen, it really tries to confuse you and asks for your email when it really wants your login ID. So if you're having trouble, either shoot me a Slack message or come see me during break, and we'll make sure you can get into Canvas. You're not alone. Canvas is a royal pain in the ass for everyone. So don't think it's you if you can't get it. Anything else? And whoever's remote, I do have chat up, but if you throw something in chat and you're like, he's ignoring me, I feel so betrayed right now, please come off mute. We can hear you in person here, so, and all the students can hear you as well. So if you have any questions that pop up, definitely let me know. Tomorrow, we'll be breaking out into groups and we'll split you guys virtually. So if you're attending virtually, we'll put you in a breakout room and go over how to use Zoom whiteboards. And then if you're in person, obviously we'll take care of the group breakout at that point. But tonight we're staying all in person, so shouldn't be no problems there. Okay, so we're gonna start out. Okay, so we're going to start out with a requirements gathering exercise. This is going to be very similar to what we did yesterday in terms of brainstorming, right? So you can throw out ideas as they pop up, but imagine an eccentric car CEO comes to you. He would like to design a car where the vast majority of it is controlled from the touchscreen. He would like, the CEO would like you to design the interface for that car. What we're going to be spending the first half of class on is you get to ask me, playing the car CEO, whatever questions you would like that you need to know in order to design this interface. Someone talking remotely? Someone said color. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, I would say like the layout and, for which system you wanna, like the mobile phone, like Android and iOS are completely different. But nowadays the same app works for both of things. Like Apple has
Yeah.
Apple Play, Google has Google CarPlay.
So
So it
we're
would be
gonna say no CarPlay, no Android Auto. I want an interface completely made from scratch.
okay, so we would need to figure out what base we're using, like as like Linux, or we're using Android or whatever we're using, and a layout of what it's gonna be like an app. So we're gonna have to figure out the layout and everything and the system we're gonna use.
When you get in a car, do you think, oh, let me use this app? No, right? When you get in a car, you go, here's this touch screen, and I'm going to interact with maybe different components of that touch screen, but that's just the screen there, right? That's not an app per se. Now there may be subcomponents that feel like apps when we're interacting with the car, but that's up to you guys. That layout is what we want to kind of feel out. And so before we can get to that layout, we need to know the requirements of what needs to go into the layout. And so that's what we're brainstorming here, of what are some functions or components that might be in there.
Well, first things first, you definitely need something for like time, clock, things of that nature. I wouldn't put too many engine features in an interface, because people have that issue with Teslas now and they don't really like it, versus like Mustang has that type of stuff on the dash still, and it works a little better. So I will leave it simply to like.
That's a great question. You don't get to decide that. What you get to ask is, hey, I'm the client, all right? I'm going to you guys to do this work. And what you guys get to do is ask that question of, hey, do we have a dash, right? Because that's not something that you get to decide, or maybe it is. Maybe the client comes back to you and says, hey, a second screen for a dashboard is totally fine. In this case, we're going to add the requirement. The client is saying no dashboard. Everything must be in this one center screen.
Okay.
How big is the screen? Great question. We're going to say it's a 15-inch screen, so you get plenty of space to be able to work with, even bigger than your laptop screens. Your laptop screens are 13 inches to give you an idea of screen size. Navigation. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to need some kind of GPS and guidance, right? A music player. Yeah.
Would we, hello, everyone. Would we need to know what type of language that the mechanical parts can interpret from that operating system before we even
Great question.
to begin with the functions and all the micro pieces of it? I could be wrong, but just throwing it out there. My name's Rain. Hi everyone. How you doing?
So we're going to kind of sum that up into kind of car status, right? So we're not going to get into the technical weeds necessarily of how the car systems under the hood are going to report that data. But when we're designing our layout, we definitely need to be able to show that information, right? So car status, that can kind of break out into a couple different things, right? We kind of need to know some basics. What things in particular do we want to dive into on the car status? What is some information that we need to know about what's going on with the car?
Tire pressure, gas gauge, battery status, things of that nature, lights, whatever lights are out, oil changes, maintenance.
What did you say? You threw something out there for car status? Okay. That is a great question. So let's say that self-driving just, I don't know, based in the real world, may still be a couple years off from being reality. So we're gonna say that there are safety features that we need to take account of, but full self-driving isn't going to be part of the layout quite yet. But you asked an even better question of how much of the car do we need to control, right? Because hypothetically, there could be no steering wheel. There could be no buttons. So that is the question that we want to dig into a little bit more. So let's say that there are some very basic things, a steering wheel, there's a accelerator and a brake pedal, the turn signals, and the gear selector will all be part of the actual hardware that we don't need to worry about, and the window switches. Everything else needs to be on this touchscreen. Wipers, yep, that's important. What was that? Defrost?
Signals?
We've got the tire pressure, car status. We can add the turn signals onto that, right? We need to know cameras.
Where's the location of this 15-inch screen? And will that contribute to the safety factor you actually driving?
Good question. It's going to be centered right in the middle of the dashboard.
Okay.
You have something? Lane keeping assist. So let's do a category maybe, let's just throw it in here. Lane keep assist. Oh, absolutely. Well, not even how fast the car can go, but how fast is the car going? Cameras we got? And there's a great question. Maybe that should have been asked at the beginning, right? Because that's going to factor into everything. This is an electric vehicle. Trunk access. Charging stations. Hazard lights, because it is federally required, will be a physical button. Push to start engine. What's that? Let's say there will be voice control that we need to factor into it. Passenger airbag info. Think about when you get in your car, right? Hypothetically, if it were an electric car, what are some things that you may need, that you may interact with your car already? Window switches will be buttons on the, don't need to be on the screen.
The remote.
Automatic start?
So we've got push to
The
start,
key fob.
Okay.
seatbelts. I think we can group that in. Oh, we already have that under car status.
Okay.
Anti-theft. We've got, do we have lights? We have lights under car status, but we also probably need a way to control the lights, right? So we'll say headlights. And I think someone said, yep, we got wipers. Virtual voice control, we've got under going there already.
Under lights, would we also need a way to control the lighting of the display from daytime to nighttime, shifting with the clock time?
Yeah, so we'll put that under maybe display settings.
And also temperature, like heated seats, air conditioning.
So we've got aircon, but that's a good point, right? We probably also need heated seats control. We also need to be able to control the mirrors, right? Mirror positioning. Separate users.
What about heated windows?
No heated windows in this car.
Okay. The rear camera.
Wait, no, this is- okay, good.
Seat positions we got.
Okay.
Ah, there's a good one, Bluetooth. Now, let's talk about Bluetooth for a second. What do we expect out of our Bluetooth in a car? Phone calls, but what also do we expect?
Music.
Music. We expect to be able to stream our Bluetooth, right? Apple CarPlay, we're gonna skip in this. The car has no sunroof.
Oh, okay.
The car is gonna have Wi-Fi, so we need Wi-Fi control. Blinkers we have already under turn signals. Charging information we already have under charging stations.
Okay.
Let's say that it can't do its own hotspot. It will not be a wheelchair accessible car. Emergency contacts. That's a good one. Can add that. No rear TV in this car. Garage door opener is a good one. No OnStar in this car because it's not owned by GM. Ability to move seats while in motion. I believe that we have seat positions that's already on the list. And by the way, if you guys want to pull this up, this is on, if you go to the C5 daily outlines in Canvas, you can go on to this requirements gathering and just click on the link here. That's going to open the spreadsheet so you can kind of see the existing one on your computer and kind of scroll. Eco Drive, that's a good one, right? We want to control drive train mode. What's that? The horn settings, we'll say. Because what kind of crazy car would let you adjust what the horn sounds like?
Your Tesla.
Oh, excuse me.
Right.
This is a hypothetical, people. I have no idea where you're leading me here.
It's
What
nice.
about a firewall for this vehicle that has a whole electronic ecosystem so it can't be hacked?
Great question. We're going to say that the firewall falls more under the technical implementation level. So,
Okay.
but that's a really good question, right? We are focused on kind of the end user. We're thinking about what the end user needs to interact with here. That's not to say that a firewall isn't important. That's just more on the technical implementation team as opposed to the technical design team.
Okay.
So we are basically just designing the front end.
You're designing the front end. That's
the client
exactly what we're
side.
doing. We are looking at the user interface and the user experience, right? The UI and the UX.
Would charging stations refer to like the actual outlets in your car, or do you mean charging station like charging the car at a portal, a charging portal?
Great question. So we probably not only need to be able to see charging stations, but we also need to be able to control charging like the port. What else? Eva, you've had your hand raised for a while. Is anything on the list that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it just occurred to me, like, because it's a car, you would have to also be aware of any legal requirements, because it's very heavily regulated, so you would have to
Yes.
know what the limitations are, have them in the back of your mind as you were like looking to design.
Yeah, so we're gonna sum that all up in a legal review. So oftentimes, my day job, so to speak, is working in the healthcare industry. And oftentimes we'll finish our content or our code and say, hey, this is ready, let's ship it out. And the legal team comes in and goes, not so fast. We want to review everything. And so depending on what your end user is or what kind of industry you're in, you may have to go through a legal review where the attorneys get involved. You have to do some kind of export out of your system so that they can review everything. Normally, that's not at the code level. But depending on what kind of industry you're in, you may actually have to go through security review, right? Where not only the lawyers get involved to make sure that everything is up to snuff, but you may have to go through a security team review where they go through line by line of your code and make sure that you're not opening up any vulnerabilities. So oftentimes we do have to have a legal review or a code review or a DevOps team review. But for these purposes, we're going to say that comes after we design the interface, right? We're going to shoot first and ask questions later. We're going to design our interface, and then we're going to hand it over to the legal team and say, hey, is this allowed? Can we get away with all of this? Which, believe it or not, oftentimes there are so many legal requirements that oftentimes you can't know that you're breaking one of them until you have actually built the product and then need to design around it. The NHTSA is the big security, the big car requirements for North America. They do all of the 5-star crash safety rating and all of that stuff. And they've got a book that is about 4,000 pages long on interface design and all of these requirements for your car. The headlights need to be a certain number of inches off the ground, but they can't be more than this many inches off the ground. They, believe it or not, down to the width of your light, they have requirements on. Fortunately, we're not on the hardware side, and so we're going to say that the legal review comes after our interface design.
I may be wrong, but would we need to have something where the user can monitor the radar sensors that detect like lights and speed limit, etc.? Maybe.
Yeah. So
something
let's put that all under car status, right? We need to know when cruise control is engaged. We need to know, I think we have some information down here, cruise control, and maybe let's say radar and safety system output. Now that's a layout thing, right? That's up to you guys to decide. What if I am not in the maps? What if I'm on a different screen? What information should always be on the screen no matter what I'm in? We're going to get to that in a second. We're going to talk about how do we start thinking about layout? Now that we've got all these requirements, what comes next? User manual. Great question. Yeah, a lot of cars don't come with user manuals anymore, believe it or not. What else? Someone said MPH in the chat. I think we've got that under oh, I'm not crazy. We definitely added that, didn't we?
I think so.
Oh, there we go. How fast the car's going. Yeah.
Would this car have something like Siri or some type of automated voice that kind of assists?
Yep,
Oh, that's
got
voice
voice control on the
okay.
list. Odometer? Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I've got drivetrain mode in there, so let's lump that all as part of that. That's sport eco, that's all-wheel drive, not. That's kind of all. Weather, yeah. What else? Envision sitting in your car, right? What are the things that you need to be able to do? Are they on this list?
It's Tara. I don't know if this will be separate, but would the car need to be able to sync with a mobile app to be able to control unlocking it, starting it, adjusting the temperature?
Yeah. Now that brings up an interesting question. Are we the team that designs the mobile app? Because oftentimes the team designing the interface for one system may not be the team designing the interface for another system. Believe it or not, in most companies, the mobile teams are actually split in two. The Android team and the iOS team are two usually completely separate teams. And that's often why when you'll see a friend's phone using, a different platform, the apps won't be identical because they're two separate teams that are using the same backend to provide the same features and information.
And also I'm sorry. And also they're using completely different language while making those apps.
Not necessarily, but usually they do, yes. Date time, I've got added. Parking finder, we'll say that's not a requirement. That's not what we call the MVP, the minimum viable product, which you guys will be learning about a little bit later. Emergency alerts, I think we have all under safety system output, so we can include that as part of that. What? Setup wizard. Let's put that under maybe user profiles, separate users, user profiles, and setup wizard. Custom lighting, sure.
Are we doing electric charging for mobile devices in the vehicle?
Let's say that doesn't need to report out on the touchscreen.
Okay.
More of a hardware thing. Anything
like a wallpaper or something?
Let's say that's not required for MVP.
Themes, like you can change colors.
Yeah, we can lump that all under, we've got a display settings, so. Let's say that all falls into the mobile app. Anything else? Any other kind of essential features that you guys are thinking about? What? Maybe not a fingerprint reader, but we talked about locking. We probably need something about keys, right? How do we manage what keys are allowed into the system, or can we pair a new key? Or yeah, that's important. So let's say locks, and let's add keys under that section. And we can also say window locks. Do we have something window related? No, we don't. Let's throw that in there as well. Anything else?
Emergency brake system or no?
Yeah, I think we have that under we've got radar and safety system. Let's just assume that kind of all falls in there.
Okay.
All right, so I think this is a pretty good list. What would you guys go from here? Where would you say, all right, we know what our end goal is, right? Our end goal is this very pretty interface that we have designed that we can hand over to our developers and say, this is what we want you to make. But we've got to take some steps between that final product and this list of quizzing your client. Where do we go from here? Yeah. Before we even get there, what's the step before that? I agree, we will be doing that. What's right before there? Categorize. We've got to say, all right, we've got 20 people here that are going to be designing this interface. If we take all 20 people and just say, go design me an interface, imagine how hard it was just to get this whole list together. We need to divide and conquer. But we can't just say, hey, you take the first 5, we'll take the next 5, because then all of a sudden the locks team isn't talking to the window team, and those interfaces should be together and aren't. So what we need to do before we can even break down and categorize these things, we should identify what our categories are going to be. So what we're going to start with is, and now I'm going to cheat and look at my notes because one second to pull that up. Oh, of course I don't have it. All right, do it off the fly. So we want to think about, all right, there's probably one pane of the car, right, that should always be showing. That's going to be our car status. That's going to have some other requirements in it. But one team should probably be focused on just saying what is always going to be on the screen, what's always going to show up for the user, no matter what they have on the screen. So that's going to be our first category. I'm gonna no, I don't want to do that. Add. There we go. All right, so our first category is going to be, we're going to call that persistent status, right? That's what's going to always show up on the screen. Now, and feel free to kind of scroll through this list. What other categories does this fall into? If you were to break this up and say, hey, we're going to assign different teams, what would be the names of those teams?
Driver comfort, maybe.
Driver comfort. So that I think is a little too specific. Maybe instead of driver comfort, we want to look at maybe car settings, and driver comfort, I think, might fall under that. So let's say that there is car settings is going to be one team, one department. What else? We got safety, entertainment, media. I think safety can fall under actually both of these, right? The safety systems need to report out. That probably needs to be a persistent status. If I've got a head-on collision warning, I don't want that hidden by my music app, right? But at the same time, there are going to be some controls over that safety setting that I don't want on the screen all the time. So we're going to say that safety falls into both of them. Entertainment and media, I think that's a big one, right? We're going to say media and music, because that's a big part of what we interact with. The music that we're controlling, you know, what source is coming? Do we get to have some streaming in here? All of that kind of stuff. So I think that's another big team. Natasha said, figure out what you want immediate icon access to versus drop lists, files, things you can search for, all that stuff. That's all going to fall under the persistent status team, right? Because the persistent status team probably needs a portion of the screen, but then they need some interface to be able to switch out, right? To have other people, other teams be able to display their interface. So we're going to tackle layout kind of together before we get into that information. So car status, that all is going to go into persistent status. I always want to know what my battery level is. Tire pressure, that's something that the persistent status team is going to have to figure out how to design. Is that something that's always on the screen, or is that something that can be accessed? So there may be some collaboration that needs to happen here. Maybe the persistent status team is going to go to the car settings team and say, hey, we only have this much space, but in the settings, we want to be able to display information like tire pressure. So there might need to be some collaboration going on here where we can figure out whose team is going to tackle this information. The user profile avatar, that may be under car settings, that may go under persistent status, right? So we want to look through this list. What about things on this list that may be worth an entire team tackling that feature? What? Yeah, we're going to say navigation. So we've got music, we've got car settings, we've got persistent status, we've got navigation. Ooh, heating, right? Think about how many buttons are on your car right now for heating controls. Where the air is going, what temperature it is, if it has dual zone, if you're, in your defrost settings, all of that, the fan speed, all of that, that seems like a pretty big interface, right? So we're going to dedicate an entire team to climate. Great question. Is that car settings or is that navigation? That's going to be up to your teams when you break up to interface and talk to the other teams, because otherwise you're going to end up with settings in two places. And believe it or not, that does happen on cars. You'll find a setting in different places and you're like, well, why can I adjust it here, but also adjust it over here? So that's going to be super important to talk through. We are, for navigation, using our API, sourcing the map data, that's all on the technical team, right? We're just focused on what does the interface look like? No matter where we're sourcing that car data or that map data, we still need to design the interface to be able to display that map data. So we don't necessarily have to get into what does the map show up as, but we probably do need to think through what are those sub requirements of the navigation. I can't just say map goes here and call it a day. I need to think through, well, what are the requirements of navigation? Well, probably first and foremost, we need to display our current location. So that's going to be part of the layout. We need to be able to have some place to enter an address. So that's going to be part of the layout. We need to think through, well, once the address gets entered, there are going to be multiple options on the screen, right? If I want to go to McDonald's, there are 5 different McDonald's in range that I could go to. What does that screen look like? And then what's the screen look like for the navigation? I may need to display turn information. I may need to display the blue route or whatever color route on the map. So some of you guys are going to have to display multiple screens depending on how you do that layout. We're going to talk through those steps in a couple minutes.
I have a
That
question.
is a good question. Yes, it will be. And then car safety, backup cameras, auto brakes, all of that. That's going to be between either car settings. Is this something that I want to be able to adjust? Or persistent status of, hey, is this an alert that I need to display to the user?
What cruise control fall under persistent status is something you probably will often need, that and wipers and things like that.
Yeah, so that's going to go into car settings. So let's go through the list and kind of talk through this. So OS base, we're going to just say NAC, not a concern, right? That's not our headache. That's the hardware team. That is the another team that's going to be taking care of those issues for us. Time. Now, we may disagree on this, right? We may have different opinions on this, but for me, I always want to be able to see the time. So I'm going to say that goes under persistent status. And I don't know why I doubled time and clock. So no dash, that's just going to fall under the details, right? That's the client providing us some information. That's important. That's all the teams need to know that. But it's not something that we need to go to a particular team and say, hey, you're in charge of 15 inches. Well, no, that's up to all of the teams to be able to describe within those constraints. So we'll put that under details. The navigation and GPS guidance. We're going to put this under the navigation team, obviously, but there needs to be more requirements thought out here, right? I already listed some of them, but depending on what team you end up on, you may need to determine what falls under all of that information. Music team, right? We already put that under their own team, same for climate. Heated seats. Now, I'm thinking car settings. There's going to be a lot of information in there, right? And they're going to be in charge of controlling a lot of screens. And when I think about heated seats, that's a button, right, on my car, right in that climate control system, usually somewhere. So I'm going to put that under the climate team. Mirror positioning, I think that falls under car settings. All of these things under car status are a great starting point. We're going to put that under persistent status as well. But I'm going to put an asterisk here. If there are things that need to be controlled here, we need to be collaborating with the car settings team, or maybe one of the other teams, to say, hey, we need to display the status information, but if you need to control it, like the lights, that might be in the car settings team. So some collaboration might have to happen there. Wipers, I think that goes car settings. Defrosts, I think that goes climate. Cameras, I think that goes persistent status. Same for lane keep assist, although that may also need some settings overlap. Wow, I cannot spell for the life of me. So let's throw that in as well, just in case there's overlap. Let's just do it like this. Persistent status and car settings. So it's going to be up to you guys to decide, well, what needs to be displayed persistent compared to, hey, what can I go into the settings and display? Yes, thank you. Current speed, I think that's persistent. Engine diagnostics, I think that goes in persistent. You don't have to go too deep into that one. So maybe when you're designing your screens, you may not need like an error message for every single thing that could go wrong. But maybe when you're designing your screens, you say, hey, this is a variation of the design. If there's an alert, this is where it would show up. Question? Yes. Where do we? A battery gauge and oil change. I think that we can strike that as well. Okay. Electric vehicle, that's just info, right? Did I say info up here? Details. Trunk access. I'm gonna say car settings on that one. Charging stations, that's up to the navigation team. Charging control, that's gonna go car settings. Push to start, we're actually going to say that there is no start button in this car, and we can put that under details. Voice control, we're going to file that under MVP, minimum viable product. You guys aren't responsible for voice control this time around. That may be a feature that we roll out down the road, but it is not required for the minimum viable product for getting this car out on the road and making it feel like it is still a feature complete car. Airbag information, we can say that is persistent. Status. Anti-theft information, we'll say not a concern on that one. We'll skip that. Headlights need to go car settings, seat positions. This one, we're actually going to file under details. This car will have the traditional seat adjust that you kind of have on the side of the seat to be able to move it forward and backwards and all of that stuff. So details, and I'll also file that under not a concern. Display settings, car settings, Wi-Fi, car settings, emergency contacts, we'll say that's an MVP, garage door opener. Now this could go either way, right? You could say car settings, but I don't know, if I'm pulling into my driveway and opening up my garage door, I don't want to be going through a bunch of different menus, right? So what we need to think through is for that persistent status, is there a way we can lay out the screen? Because we're going to have limited screen real estate. 15 inches sounds like a lot, but we're going to have to agree on some kind of system to be able to still have persistent information, but have other information also displayed. Drivetrain mode, we'll say that's car settings, horn settings, also car settings, locks and keys. We'll say that that is, actually, we're gonna split this. We're going to say that the lock info is going to be persistent status. But the keys are going to be under car settings. That would be up to the car settings to decide that. Cruise control, I think that that is persistent status. I will say that there are also details there. You will not have to start or stop the cruise control from the touchscreen, but you will have to be able to see whether or not the cruise control system is engaged and what speed it's set to. So we're going to say speed info and on off is all that needs to display. We'll say not control. Legal review will file under details, so that's going to happen down the road. User manual, I would expect to find that probably in the car settings to be able to dig in and find it. Odometer, I'm going to argue that that in most cars is considered persistent status, but when you really think about it, how often are you checking your odometer, right? We probably don't need that information kind of front and center in the persistent status. So we're going to bury that somewhere in the car settings. Weather information, however, I think that that's persistent status, but only the current temp. I don't think most cars have a weather app, or if they do, it's kind of its own interface. I think for now we can say, hey, weather persistent status, you know, just show the temperature, everything else is fine. Mobile app, we're going to say that is not MVP. So we can skip that one. Date and time, I think we probably need to show probably just the time. And that can be persistent. And window locks, let's say that's car settings as well. So, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm sitting here looking at this list, I am shitting myself if I am on car settings and I'm coming really close to persistent status, because that's a lot of information. It's all trying and jam into one screen, right? That may be, oh, question?
Yeah, I just want to go back up a few rows. Sorry, it took me forever to think about how to formulate the question, but can we worry about like location specific persistent statuses, like the keys aren't on the screen until your car is near your house or the garage door opener kind of thing? Like it's not always on my home screen, but it will be when I'm in vicinity to the places that they'll be used.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And as layout people, you would go to your client and say, hey, do we have access to that information? Is that a feature that we can build in? And as the client, I'm going to say, yes, you can. So what we're going to learn about next is how we do wireframes, how we start laying out all of this content. And as those wireframes are getting done, those questions, just like that one, are going to pop up. And so what you'll be able to do is I'm going to say yes to that question. You can do location-specific information, and that's going to play into your variant question, right? So that's where you're going to say, hey, I'm going to leave some notes on this wireframe that says something like garage door opener only shows when at home location. Maybe we don't need to do a deep dive of that going into the car settings and what that integration looks like. If we were pursuing this as our major project, yes, we would. But for now, that's something that you can factor in. Because we are going to have a couple days to work on this, it's going to be up to you guys to prioritize what features am I going to focus in on, right? What do we want to tackle in the layout? Because car settings probably is not going to get through all of those different features, but maybe they say, all right, what are the most important features that we tackle here? Maybe we go into a quick setting screen and we describe, we do the layout on all of that, but then we agree on what tabs or nav bar or something to switch between these other screens looks like. So you don't have to get everything done here. This is just kind of an experiment for you guys to go through 2 of the 3 phases of design, which we're going to learn about in the second half of class.
Thank you.
So you don't have to get everything done here, but great question. And those questions will pop up as you go. That's totally fine. All right, how are we feeling? We feeling like now that we've got this categorized, we could kind of split up maybe a little bit better and say, all right, now what? That's where we're headed. So I'm going to go back to my outline and see how far we are straying. We are actually doing pretty good. Okay, so we're going to go on break a couple minutes early just because we're at a good pausing point here. So go on break at 6:50 now, or almost 6:50. Be back at 7:15. We'll give you guys a 25-minute break. That goes for you guys virtually and in the classroom. Take a break, be back at 7:15, and we'll dive into the next setup here of wireframe mockup and prototype. Okay. We are going to jump right on in. Let me close out some of this stuff. So unfortunately, we are going to kind of put this project on hold until tomorrow. And so one thing we're going to touch on right now is wireframe mockup and prototype. Believe it or not, those are 3 names that all sound like the same thing, but mean separate things in the industry. So we are going to talk a little bit about wireframing mockup and prototyping. We're going to talk about a couple other industry terms and then get you guys out of here tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to break out into groups. And if you're in person, you can use the whiteboards here or paper and pencil. You're going to create wireframes within your groups. If you are attending virtually, you'll be using the Zoom whiteboards feature. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you guys into breakout rooms if you're virtual. And so you guys can work on, hey, what's it like to do a wireframe together? Now, normally I hate group projects. So the good news is you don't need to turn anything in. This is not for a grade, but it will give you guys an opportunity to kind of work together, figure out how you want to attack your wireframe, what that plan looks like, and go from there. That's all coming down the pipeline tomorrow. Tonight, I want to touch on wireframe mockup and prototype. I'm going to drop this link in the Zoom chat in case you want to read it. I will also put it on the daily outline for tonight. Give me 1 second to do that. Wireframe mockup and prototype. And I will also dump that in Zoom. Okay. So does anyone want to take a stab at what they think the difference is between a wireframe and a mockup? Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. So a typical mockup, where's my wireframe? A wireframe looks like this. Sorry, I've got faces covering everything. So a wireframe is usually black and white or grayscale. You're not really putting pictures into it yet. You're not doing a ton of color yet. The main goal of a wireframe is to say, do I have everything on the screen? Do I understand the layout of this? Now, a very common mistake people make in their wireframes is exactly what happened here. They put placeholder content in, right? So it says pound, 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 and value underneath it. And I'm looking at that wireframe and I'm like, I have no freaking idea what would go in there, right? I'm like, okay, it's a profile page. Maybe it's something with like the stats of the profile. I can't stand that in a wireframe. I want to know in a wireframe what the general content is that should go in there. With that said, you don't need to necessarily have everything fully figured out in a wireframe, but you want some general idea of, okay, if numbers are going to show up there, at least put a label underneath the numbers of what that's going to be. So, but wireframe is kind of your first place to figure all of this out. A lot of people will use a couple different applications to create wireframes. However, I am old school. I love either a whiteboard or paper and pencil. So the very first apps that I made, I used what is called the Cheez-It method. Why is it called the Cheez-It method? Because I literally had a box of Cheez-Its sitting on my desk. I took the box, I went over to the whiteboard, I held it up on the wall, I traced the box out, and I went, what's on our first screen? All right, I draw my login screen, right? I put the sign-in button in there. Okay, now what's next? All right, so I draw the little arrow and I go from the login screen. You can either go to the create account screen. I take the Cheez-It box and there's my sign-in screen or my login screen or my create account screen. And I kept going, right? I kept on drawing more and more boxes and figuring out what the flow is from there. So the wireframe is your opportunity to say, I don't need to know software how to do this. I don't need to really worry about the design or the colors I'm picking, or I don't really need to worry about rounded edges or square edges or anything like that. The wireframe is my chance to say, can I take these requirements and say, hey, this requirement right here is showing up right here on the screen. And of course, you may go through different versions of your wireframe and move things around, and that's totally fine. Your wireframe is your most malleable, right? That is your chance to move around the layout of your screen the most and really figure out, oh, turns out we forgot this entire section of the navigation, right? So now we need to decide, is that something that we're adding into the navigation on an existing screen, or do I need to pull my Cheez-It box back out, make a new square, figure out what that looks like on the screen?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is it like the outline or the template?
Yeah, it's kind of both, right? It's more of a visual outline. It's kind of the way to get all of the requirements out on the screen without having to worry about spacing and design. It's more about the layout of the items and what is supposed to be on that actual screen. So Sketch is a very popular app for both doing wireframing, mockups, and prototyping. We're going to be learning tomorrow in the second half of class an application called Figma. And Figma is great. A lot of people will do both their wireframes and mockups in them. However, based off of what we learned last cohort, dumping you in Figma is really hard because you're learning what a mockup is. We're kind of skipping the wireframing step, and you're learning this new software called Figma that you've never used before. So we're breaking that down a little bit more this cohort. We're saying, hey, you're going to start with a wireframe, and you're going to either use Zoom whiteboards, which is really drag and drop if you're virtual in the breakout room where you guys can collaborate, or you're going to be in person and you're going to use paper and pencil or the whiteboards up on the wall to get your wireframes done. Once they are complete, at Open Hack on Thursday, that's going to be your project. So you're going to kind of decide, hey, do I want to socialize a little bit, or do I want to work on my mockups a little bit? And this is totally up to your group to decide how far you want to go on these wireframes or the mockups. So there's no requirement. There's no, hey, you've got to turn this in at the end. But on Monday at the beginning of class, we'll go through all 5 groups, whether it's a virtual group or an in-person group. You guys can share your screen in Figma. You can kind of show, hey, here are the pictures of the wireframes, and here's what they evolved into for the mockups. Question, remote, go ahead.
So the Sketch app, can we just do, is it gonna be like a web page or is it gonna be an app? Like, you know, because it shows like it's a mobile app on there, or is it, I don't know. Yeah,
so we won't be using Sketch. Sketch is the main competitor to an app we will be using tomorrow called Figma, Figma.
Yeah.
Figma is a web app, so you don't have to download anything. That will run right in your browser. It's free to create an account. Don't create an account yet. Don't get too far ahead. We get, as a education institution, we get access to like the paid version of Figma because you guys are students. So I'll be sharing that information tomorrow. We'll watch an intro to Figma video, or I'll go through it. And we'll kind of do that in the second half of class. First half of class is going old school, doing our wireframes, either paper and pencil or virtual whiteboard, and going from there.
So is it gonna be like a portfolio app, like just about yourself, or it's just gonna be like an app in general, like anything?
No, it's gonna be you building the interface for the car. So we're actually gonna break out into teams tomorrow, based off of what's up here. So we're gonna break out into 5 teams. I'll assign you guys to a team. You'll go out in breakout rooms and you'll actually focus on whatever your group name is, taking these features and building it into your interface.
Got it.
Can't get off the hook that easy. We did all the work for the requirements. Now we get to kind of start thinking through what it looks like.
I forgot about the car part.
I was just gonna add that when we were doing wireframing, it had, for me at least, I had more flow, like directions from this page to this page, which I think in that diagram, it didn't have it. So I don't know. I think that made it a little unclear. So like when you think about this flow, if it's this and then it's going to go to this page, it really helped me figure out how many pages I had to build. And as opposed to, I saw what he meant by the fact that it did look like a mobile app as opposed to different pages of the same app.
Yeah, so this
sense? Okay.
This example is just for a mobile app. That's a great point. You can wireframe for websites, you can wireframe for mobile apps, you can wireframe for car interfaces. When we think about user interface, there are a ton of different interfaces that we interact with as users, right? And so what we'll do before we break out into groups is come up with an agreement, right? We're going to start in Figma and we're going to start designing out what our app is going to look like, kind of the base of it. What's the navigation look like? How do we switch between the different screens? And then we're going to use in order to use a Git term, we're going to fork that design. So you guys will be able to work inside of Figma when we get to that step of designing your mockups within this interface with the layout agreed upon. But anyway, that's all tomorrow. That's coming down the pipeline. Any questions on that? Okay. So said, all right, Max, there's the wireframe, and you've told us what a mockup looks like. This is an example mockup, right? I am sharing the screen. So a little bit more color, right? We can start seeing things come together here. We can see, hey, instead of just saying profile flights and hotels, which we may have put as labels in our wireframes, now we get to actually pick the icons that show up. Okay, how do we understand what tab is active? Maybe we duplicate our screen and we show, hey, on this other screen, that color is going to pop in to show that that's the current icon. Natasha, you're totally right. A mockup is phase 2 of the wireframe. It is taking our wireframe and adding a little bit more meat to it, right? It's fleshing it out a little bit more. It's saying, hey, now we're not just talking about the content and the layout that's on the screen. We're talking about the design aspects of it. What fonts are we using? What's the spacing between the items? Do we have icons showing up? What's the picture that's going to show up in that item? Now, obviously, you don't need to do every single screen as a mock-up. We're not going to require the car settings team to do 20 different screens, but you may have, if you're on the persistent status team, you may have more variations, right? You may have more squares compared to the climate team, which may have more functionality limited into that one screen. Totally up to you guys to decide what that functionality is going to look like, what the different screens are going to look like. But we'll give you guys a starting point tomorrow to say, hey, let's all agree, this is how we're going to switch between apps. Let's agree this is going to be the persistent team side. Let's agree where the apps are going to show up. And then from there, we'll build it out. Now you may say, Max, you said wireframes and mockups, but there was that third one. What is a prototype? A prototype is phase 3 of the evolution of designing. A prototype is actually making something that you can hand to an end user and say, play around with my app. Now, it's not fully functional. There's not a database connected to it. It's not going to work with multiple users. Scrolling may or may not work. There may be certain things where you say, hey, you can click on the first item in this list, but none of the other items work. It's basically a way to visually add interactivity to your mockup without having to write the code for that. We won't be covering prototyping in class, and it is kind of optional. A lot of people will say, well, I'm a developer, I had this design done, now I want to just go build it, right? I know I'm going to have to build it eventually. Let me just dive into the code. I'll make my code look like the mockup, and then we'll make it all work. A prototype is that kind of half step between it. It's saying, hey, this is a way for a designer to be able to add interactivity in so that you can get a better feel for that user experience in the design without having them to have to write code. So prototyping is a great option if you're playing around with multiple different mockups, if you're trying to feel out what is better for the user, but it's not something that we'll be covering. With that said, Figma and Jonah, I'm blanking, what's the prototyping, the big one? Oh, my brain hurts so much right now. What's the big one? I will find it and get back to you guys. There's a definitely industry leader. Anyway, Figma does it now. Sketch has those features built in. We'll be using Figma. Don't sign up for an account yet. We'll get you account creation details and go from there. I posted a link to this if you are a reader, if you're someone who likes to read articles and kind of understand it a little bit more. This particular post is from Sketch, but the same goes no matter what tool you're using, whether it's a whiteboard, whether it's a design app like Figma, or whether it's something for achieving a prototype. Those same principles apply. Some people will completely skip a wireframe and say, I'm a designer, I'll just do it all in the mockup phase. Some people say, I'm going to do a wireframe and hand that off to my developers, and I'm going to let them design it. Usually a terrible idea. It turns out that people who are really good at writing code, people who are really good at design, that intersection in between them is usually quite rare. So UI design is an entire job title, and that transitions us to where we're headed next, which is job titles. So Christy Pressler is used to be based in Syracuse, has been an instructor for our program and made this really awesome chart, which is probably really hard to see on the projector, but if you're in Zoom, you can see it there. I also have it linked in the C5 daily outlines under job titles. So we have talked a little bit about stack. We're getting comfortable understanding, hey, there's front end and back end. These are some common job titles that you guys may start seeing more often, especially when you start your job search. And sometimes it's not really clear, okay, what is a UI engineer? Kind of where do we draw the line on that, right? And so this kind of shows you, hey, you can be a full-time visual designer and not know how to write a line of code. Granted, if you do know how to write that code, you can design things that are easier to build for your development team. And there are definitely some roles that kind of span two of these categories, right? So a design technologist is going to do all the design work, but then also either be able to write the front end code or work with the front end team to build out that design efficiently in their code. Full stack developer obviously is spanning the gap between front end and back end a little bit, right? And the one of the issues in our industry is not everyone agrees on these terms. So you could interview as a front end developer in 2 different companies, and one company may expect you to only write code and not do a single thing of design. And another company may say, we expect you to do all of the design and all of the code. So reading the job descriptions are really important there. In the interviewing phase, you'll also be able to ask that question of what's it really look like for me in this role. This is a diagram that's probably a little overwhelming right now. That's okay. When we come back to this all the way in week 23, you're going to have, which is the career week, you're going to have a lot of light bulb moments where you're going to realize, hey, project manager is something that I never thought about. Turns out I like doing all the code stuff. What I really want to be doing is making sure a team of developers are staying on track and being able to accomplish a project. That is a very popular path that students take after this program. Totally fine with us, right? You do not need to be a full stack web developer coming out of this program. You will be managing your own project throughout the course of this program with a capstone starting in week 4. So you're going to get exposure to that. We're also going to touch on project management a little bit tomorrow. What Trello looks like, what a Kanban board is, all of this stuff, probably never heard of, that's okay. Other common roles, you may hear about search engine optimization. There is a full-time job role in some companies where your sole job is to make your website show up higher on Google in the search results. That is SEO or search engine optimization. Some job roles will require you to do that as kind of part of the website development. Some companies, if they're big enough, will have an entire separate team or contract that out to make sure that your website is optimized for search engines. All kinds of interesting stuff on here. DevOps, you will be getting into with Nathan. That's kind of on, hey, now I need to work with development and get my app out on the internet. You're going to learn about deploying and all kinds of cool stuff with help desk and stuff like that. Any questions on tech roles before we move on? Great question. So in almost all of these roles, you will have like a junior senior level so that you'll have an idea of how many years of experience are you expecting. I don't know that I would quite agree that you need more education because first of all, as a developer, there's always more to learn, right? It's kind of like software development is never complete. There's always another feature to add. There's always another bug to solve. With software development, because the field is so vast, when you get done this course, even after 30 years, 40 years of a career, there will still always be another thing that you can learn. With that said, you're coming out of here as a full stack developer. You may say, hey, full stack was cool. I graduated. Design was where it's at, right? I only did that in the first week of class, but that's where I really enjoyed. That's what I enjoyed doing my capstone. I want to go learn more about that. Well, you may be qualified to get a job as a junior front end developer. You learn the code, you say, hey, I want to focus in on these couple weeks of the curriculum. This is what I want to do full time. You could get that junior job and then say, all right, what do I have to learn on the job? What are the expectations? What does my employer use a different programming language? Do I need to go learn that? Okay, I'm focusing primarily on code, but they said there's a chance that I would have to do my own mock-up. What can I go learn in design? So always more to learn, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to go complete another course in order to be able to get that job title. But it is very dependent. Project manager is one of the only agreed upon certifications in our whole industry. There is something called the PMI, the Project Management Institute. And they have a certification that if you're getting a job as a full-time project manager, 95% of companies will say we want PMI certification. For the vast majority of other roles in this diagram, there is no agreed upon certification. That doesn't mean they don't exist. But it really depends on the company, how many years of experience they're looking for. Some companies will say, we don't care what language you learn as long as you can build a website. There will be other companies that say we need 3 years of professional Python experience. And if you don't have Python, sorry, you can't get this job. So it really just depends on the opportunity. Other questions? This is just scratching the surface. You will find many other job descriptions. You will find that most of the job descriptions on here line up with the modules in our schedule. But if you're ever curious, if you ever want to have a conversation about like, hey, I'm really enjoying what we're doing, can you talk to me a little bit about what a career in this would look like? Feel free to either book a one-on-one with me or a Slack. And Zona can attest, I can rant for 30 minutes about just about any topic. So happy to have those conversations. Especially as the curriculum goes on and as you start to realize like, hey, this is something I really like, or this is something I really don't like. Happy to have those conversations. Question in the chat I don't have open.
Sorry, I'm looking at one. So Natasha said, so the mock-up is like phase 2 of the wireframe, and I
Yes. Yeah, so it's an evolution. Some people will skip a step. So some people will do a wireframe and not do a mock-up and go right to the code. I guess it's technically 4 steps. Would do a wireframe, a mock-up, a prototype, and then go to your code. Some people, a lot of people will skip the prototype step and go right to their code. Some people will skip the wireframe, do a mock-up, skip the prototype, and go right into their code.
That was me with my capstone.
A lot of people will think they don't need to wireframe, build a mock-up, think their mock-up is complete, get to the code, realize that they've forgotten a major component of their app, really regret not doing a wireframe, and then have to fix it in their mock-up before they get to their code. Really just an evolution of what you're building.
And you will be using wireframes mock-ups when you start your capstone. I don't want to scare you, but you will be using those as like a platform of how you want your capstone to look like. So that
Yeah, and we'll be touching more into that week 4 of narrowing in on ideas and starting your own wireframes. In fact, that is your homework for week 5. Is making a wireframe for your capstone. And we encourage you to do them on paper or on a whiteboard and just take a picture of it. But if you really like Figma, you can turn in a mock-up instead of a wireframe. If you really want to go all out, you can learn about prototyping and building that in Figma or whatever application you want. Just because we teach Figma in class doesn't mean that we pigeonhole you into using that platform for the assignment. So you can do a wireframe, you can go all the way up to a mock-up or a prototype for that assignment if you would like. Natasha has a question about, would a computer information technology degree be a good follow-up to this program? And the answer is really, it depends. So IT is a field that is often associated with what we're learning. It's kind of a Venn diagram, if you want to think about it, with 3 overlapping circles. There's IT, information technology. There's computer science, which would typically be housed in an engineering department, school, university, whatever. And then there's kind of this third one that the industry is still learning to figure out where the intersection is, which is a developer. So IT is going to be more focused on business operations, right? So that's going to be, hey, we need to be able to order computers and manage them and assign them to employees and set up networks and manage email accounts and maybe set up web servers and kind of everything you think about of what's it take to use computers in a business. That's what IT is. Most larger organizations have started to recognize that development does not fall under IT. It should be its own department. And so a lot of, especially tech forward companies have said, hey, engineering and software development is a completely separate department from IT. And our CIO, our Chief Information Officer, is totally different than our CTO, or Chief Technology Officer. And so engineering is kind of more classic computer science, right? That's functions and loops and syntax and deployment and DevOps, and that is what you guys will be getting a touch of. Then there's this third bubble that is bubbling out of engineering, and that is, and this is where it kind of crosses the line between industry fact and my own opinion of, hey, engineering is great, but computer science is a science, right? It's like physics, it's like chemistry. It is getting into the nitty-gritty of how a computer operates, how it allocates memory, and all of that stuff. All of that's great, but all we need is to be able to build applications and have a practical use for them. And so that's where software development kind of splinters out from engineering. That's when we start getting into, hey, you know what? I don't really need to know the efficiency of this couple lines of code. All that really matters is that I can put all of these stacked pieces together and build something that works. So as you're going through our course, IT sometimes houses the engineering department in companies, and sometimes it doesn't. So if you're leaning more into the administration of computers and servers and code, IT is a great option for you and can certainly be a good follow-up to our program. We have people come out of the program and go into cybersecurity, project management, data analytics, front-end development, user interface design, back-end and DevOps, cloud engineering. Am I missing any? Instructional technology. What? UX, UI, user interface and design. Really a lot of opportunities. And if that seems really overwhelming, you're going to be spoon-fed pieces of that throughout the whole curriculum. And then when you get to the end of the program, you're going to look back on it and be like, whoa, I learned a lot. Where do I want to go, right? And the answer may be, I want to go pursue another certificate, or I want to go pursue a 4-year degree in one of these areas. Or you may say, hey, I want to go get a job in user interface design. And while I'm applying for those jobs, I'm going to go through a LinkedIn learning course and learn more about that opportunity and kind of hone my skills in and specialize there. Or you could say full stack development is where I want to head. I'm going to take everything that I learned from the program and keep building projects and go back over the videos and all of that stuff and continue building up skills.
So I guess I can
Sorry to-
appreciate that this is
you guys
like
go.
it is a boot camp. You do kind of encompass all the information for, the different opportunities. My question was stemming from the fact that I work for New York State currently, and they usually prefer like certain accreditations and things like that. So I was just looking for like a formal follow-up for what we're doing here.
Absolutely. We have at least 6 students off the top of my head that I can think of that are currently in the Year 21 certificate programs. That is between, I don't know how many. It is a subset of the Lemoyne curriculum. So they are college classes, they are accredited, you do get college credit for completing them.
Okay.
And the two certificates that they offer right now are cybersecurity, and it's not computer science, but it's related more closely to our curriculum. And we do have a lot of students who finish our program and go into the Erie 21 certificate program.
Okay, I'll schedule some one-on-one time so we can talk more about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Another question, Ramon?
Yeah, so I was just gonna answer her. If you wanna really see like what the idea is, there's also a Harvard course called CS50. If you go through 2 or 3 classes of that, you will understand it's free. It's called CS50. I think it's on Coursera or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
on one of those platforms. It is in terms of computer science, CS50 from Harvard is considered like the gold standard in computer science. If you want to know why it is called computer science and really understand the science of writing code, CS50 is a great option. We will be kind of learning computer science in reverse. So we're going to be building projects and understanding how those projects run, and that is using the computer science under the hood. So we kind of, to use a industry term, reverse engineer the standard way of learning computer science. Instead of learning the little pieces of it and building up on it, instead we build something and then deconstruct how we built that and make sure we understand those concepts. Which I believe is a very good segment into thinking like an engineer. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but it's almost like I know what I'm talking about here. Thinking like an engineer. What do you, someone take a stab at what's an engineer do? What's engineers can be in a lot of different industries. What's the point of an engineer? Create structures. Yeah. What else?
You gotta be able to
Blueprint.
critically.
What's that?
You have to be able to critically think about a problem, the most logical, efficient way to solve it.
I like that. So if you're a chemical engineer, are you making a blueprint? No, but you are trying to solve a problem, right? Of how do these chemicals interact, or how can we make a new chemical? Engineering, in my opinion, is all about taking a complex problem and breaking them down into solvable parts. And so that's what we're going to be doing, is we're going to take this complex problem of we need a car interface, right? We need this thing to show up in the touchscreen. And we break that down into the pieces. Well, what are the requirements? How do we categorize that? Now that we've got them categorized, how do we break out into teams to solve that? Now that we're in teams, what's the next problem? You'll hear me say this throughout the course of we need to be able to see the forest through the trees, but also the trees in the forest. What we mean by that is, as an engineer, we're going to be given this huge problem that we need to be able to solve. But we need to be able to see the individual trees that make up that forest of the problem. However, we also need to be able to see the entire big picture and how that comes together. So because our curriculum is so project-based, where we're just building and building and building, what you guys need to make sure that you're prioritizing is, am I understanding the concepts? It's not just enough to get my code running. It's not just enough to see the website showing up. That's not enough. What you guys need to do is individually take on that next step of, do I understand the concept? It's not just enough to code along with me and have it show up. Can I read that code and say, this is the reason why it's turning red? This is why we put this inside of this. This is why we use parentheses instead of semicolons or curly braces or whatever it is. That may seem like a no-brainer, but after 3 hours of me coding along, one of my favorite questions I got was at the end of cohort 3. They said, what program do you use to automatically type in all of the code? I said, what? And they said, well, no one can type code that fast. What are you using like to autocomplete the code? I said, nothing. That's me typing live. Don't worry, we will take breaks. You guys will have a chance to follow along. All of that fun starts in week 2. We get through all the big picture stuff. We get through all of the planning out of wireframing and requirements and all of that stuff. And then week 2, all the way up until week 23, you guys are hands-on in code, all project-based. What I want you guys to do, not at the end of the week, but at the end of every class, take a minute, check yourself and say, hey, do I really understand this? And if you don't, go back into that class, see if you can find where we did that. If you still don't get it, shoot a message in Slack. If you don't get it, chances are someone else doesn't get it and they could benefit from that explanation. If you really aren't getting it, schedule a one-on-one. That is exactly what those one-on-ones are for. Sometimes you show up to a one-on-one and you may say, everything is working, I don't get it. That is okay. That is what we are here for. That is what the TAs are here for. That is what the guest instructors are here for. Make sure you're getting to that level of understanding, because that's what being an engineer is about. It's not just getting it working, it's understanding the pieces and the concepts of why it's working. edX, that's the platform for CS50. I will add that to, do you have access?
I do have some.
No, to the daily outlines.
I can't add it.
Give me 1 second, and then Zona will add that to.
I will also post it on the Slack too.
Remind me at the end of class, and I'll add you. I have your email and autocomplete. We'll add that to the daily outline as a resource. Okay, couple quick things to run through. We'll finish off with a video on the software development lifecycle and try and get you guys out of here a couple minutes early. Imposter syndrome. Does anyone want to take a stab at what they think imposter syndrome is? Yeah. Absolutely. It's all about doubting yourself, right? Imposter syndrome is about, Asma, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to also add is not being yourself and not being authentic to yourself and just pretend like you know everything when you don't, or not asking questions when you should be asking questions and trying to understand difficult concepts that we're talking about.
Exactly. Think about what an imposter is, right? An imposter is someone who is pretending to fit in, pretending to be someone else, but not really having qualifications or being that person. So what does it mean for imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is when we start feeling like, as an individual, I don't belong. I'm not cut out for this program. I'm not smart enough, right? This is not for me. I'm not going to get it. I should not be here. All of you guys at some point in this program are going to feel that way. And being able to identify it, being able to put a label on it, being able to go to a one-on-one and saying, hey, I'm feeling imposter syndrome here. Can you help me? Can you help me combat this? That is what is really important. So that's why it's a required reading on week 1 of our program. At some point, you're going to feel like an imposter. You're going to feel like you don't fit into this class. And knowing that all of you at some point are going to feel it helps you be able to identify it, label it, and combat it. So we'd like to call that out early on so you guys know what to look out for. Any questions or comments on imposter syndrome? And keep in mind that you're, oh, go ahead.
So whenever you feel like that, I would just take a break, go out of your room and then come back to it. Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. I mean, I did it before I started coding like way back, but I always felt like, oh, I need to get a 5-year degree to probably just make a mock-up or something, but it wasn't like that at all. Like you get over that eventually.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about a technique you can use when you're feeling stuck as well. keep in mind that all of the TAs through this program have been through the program. They have felt that imposter syndrome. It's been learning a new computer concept has been a couple years for me for when I have felt that imposter syndrome, but I certainly felt it when I got started. When I started my job 7 years ago, I was on the verge of quitting. I was literally like a day away from quitting. And my boss had given me all of this code, and he was like, I need this new feature added, and just dropped me in the deep end and was like, get it added. And I just didn't think I was cut out for it. Ended up scheduling a meeting with his son, who had now a engineer who had worked on that code. And after an hour of going through all the code, he got through it and he went, this is a fucking mess, man. Good luck. And I was like, whoa, I'm not the only one struggling with it. This guy who got a job at Google and is an engineer there is struggling with this code. If he's struggling with the code, no wonder I'm also struggling with that code. So the best way to fight imposter syndrome, go to someone else in the community, talk with them, walk through what you're feeling, and ask questions, ask for help. We will help you combat that imposter syndrome. You guys made it through a very tough admissions process. You guys are most likely a good fit. It's a boot camp. Not everyone's going to make it to the end. We're going to give you all the resources we can, but imposter syndrome is a syndrome. It is not something that is usually based in fact. And that's what we can help you combat and start to ground yourself and realize that you are a good fit, that you're not an imposter. And that's why we touched on it early on. Okay, on a more cheery note, does anyone know what rubber ducking is? Yeah. That is exactly what rubber ducking is. Rubber ducking is when you explain your code to a rubber duck. You're thinking, what the hell, where did that come from? The story goes, the legend goes, that a manager walks into the desks area, right? And someone has a little rubber duck, like an actual, what you use in the back, rubber duck sitting on their desk. And the manager asks, why do you have a rubber duck on your desk? Is this significance or backstory or? And the engineer looks at the duck and goes, oh, that's Tom. And the manager's like, what? And the engineer says, whenever I'm stuck on a problem, I get in my own head and I'm just really trying to solve this problem and I can't figure it out. And so I look away from my monitor, I look eye to eye with Tom, and I explain my problem to Tom. And the manager goes, and just to be clear here, Tom is the rubber duck, right? And the engineer goes, yes, I need to get out of my own head when I'm just trying to solve it. I may not be able to articulate what the problem is. But when I look at Tom and I talk out loud and I explain to Tom what the problem is I am trying to solve, oftentimes Tom helps me get the answer. And I can go turn back to my code, get back into it. An adjacent related thing is taking a break. When Tom is not talking back to you, when your rubber duck is not talking back to you, go take a break. We are not, our bodies, our hardware is not meant to sit down for 3 hours, let alone 8 hours on end and do something that is extremely mentally taxing. So there is something called the 20-20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes, you should look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That is for your eyes. Your eyes are not designed to fixate on text on the screen. So you get out a tape measure when you guys go fully remote, find a spot that's 20 feet away. Every 20 minutes for 20 seconds, you look 20 feet away. That resets your eyes. That makes it a little bit easier to focus. If you're stuck on a problem and rubber ducking isn't doing anything, that little item on your desk isn't helping you, get up, walk away, go take a 2-minute walk, go get a glass of water, right? Or, God forbid, go to bed, right? You it is very easy to keep going and going and going and realizing that you're grinding gears and not making any progress. Sometimes you might just be tired, right? Go take a break, go to bed. Oftentimes you will wake up with the idea. I know it sounds terrible. I keep whiteboards in my shower. I keep whiteboard markers in my shower because the shower is when the solutions always hit me. And then I can't get out of the shower fast enough to write it down of what my solution is. Well, it turns out most shower walls work as a whiteboard marker or a whiteboard surface. So you keep a whiteboard marker, you can just jot down your solution in the shower. I know it sounds crazy. That's the system that works for me. I hate to tell you, but every cohort, there is at least one student who tells me that I have invaded their dreams and that they could hear me either usually in a nightmare, but they have started to dream about their code. Sometimes it's a good thing when the solution comes to you. Sometimes it's a really bad thing when you're like, oh my God, I cannot escape this error. Please, God, help me. I am now having nightmares about my code. Good news is for most people that goes away with experience, but I'm just warning you all now, week 2, I might start, invading some of your dreams, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. So just warning you guys, take a break sometimes if you're stuck on something. I know it seems like common sense to say, get up and take a break, but it is really, really important. Whoever shows up at Open Hack on Thursday will get a rubber duck that they can take home and have on their desk. Hopefully we'll see all of you guys there. And then whenever our next in-person week is, it's probably week 5. Not exactly sure. Whenever our next in-person week is, I will also have rubber ducks for you guys then. And if you make it to the end of the program, one of our TAs has not only sponsored rubber ducks, but themed rubber ducks. So you guys get to pick at the end of graduation a rubber duck to make friends with your other rubber duck that you get at the beginning of the program. They are pirates and gardeners and all kinds of fun rubber duck themes. Yes, I'm aware of how crazy it sounds. It's important, damn it. I will also share a great comedy sketch on rubber ducks. I'm blanking on the comedian's name. If you're not in tears at the end of that sketch, you have no humor and probably won't get along with my teaching style. Okay. Last concept we're going to touch on before I show you guys a video and get you out the door. Celebrating different errors. And an error message is not just saying you're a bad developer, stop doing what you're doing, your code doesn't work, go away. An error message 9 times out of 10 is going to tell you where that error is. You're going to learn to love line numbers. You're going to learn to start reading the error. And throughout the beginning of the class, I'm going to help you on those errors, right? I'm going to help you say, hey, share your screen. What's that error trying to tell you? What's it actually leading you towards? It's not just a line number. That error message is usually trying to tell you what's wrong with your code or what the computer doesn't understand about your code. Then we hit a turning point about 2/3 of the way into the program, and I turn into your mental health therapist and I say, well, what do you think that error means? And I start making you be a little bit more inquisitive. You guys will tune out at least one point in this program when someone else has an error, and I help them solve it. And then the next day you get that error and I go, well, how did so-and-so solve this problem? And you go, I knew I should have been paying attention during that one. So that does happen. Definitely pay attention to other students' errors. Just because you don't have it doesn't mean that you won't have it down the line. We will run into hundreds of errors throughout the program. And especially when we're getting started in HTML, you will have different errors or different problems. And before you move on to that second error, take a moment and celebrate the fact that you made that other problem go away. Because oftentimes we have multiple errors that we need to solve to get to that final product that we really want to get to. But really easy to be heads down to get an error solved and be like, oh man, I've got another one. I got to go solve that. Stop. Take a minute. Say, I got that fixed. Do I understand what that error message is, how I fixed it, why it fixed it, give myself a pat on the back, right? Give yourself a little champion's pose, give yourself like a fuck yeah, and then move on to the next error, right? It's very easy to just get heads down and want to get through all of them. It does feel like a sludge, but you are making progress. Take a minute, celebrate them, make sure that you understand that this is not just one error after another. You are making progress. There is an end goal. You will get to the point where everything is working the way you want. Motivational wallpapers are great. Feel free to share them in the back channel. I believe there is one or more in the regular student channel. There's one more student that I need to get set up in Slack, and then I will be out of your back channel, and that will be just for you guys as students. If you find a meme that makes you laugh, share that with each other. This is a tough program and it's a grueling program. You will see me try and inject humor and probably fail pretty badly throughout class. I am a very sarcastic teacher. Sorry in advance if you do not have a good sarcasm detector. Jonah's laughing because she's been through the pain of my humor. But motivate each other, share things that make sense with each other. It's not just about learning resources. It's realizing that all of you guys are doing this together. So if you found it funny, chances are someone else will find it funny and share it with them. Put a smile on someone's face.
And I also wanted to just add, rely on each other, okay? You guys are all in this together, literally you're taking the same course. Ask each other, hey, do you get this? Or hey, if you don't get this, hey, like, you should find it somewhere else. If you have a link, share it with the group. Like Max can attest, like I used to share everything that I bought. Like, hey guys, look at this, watch this video, do this, like this is really helpful. Rely on each other. You are what you have. Use it as a support system.
But don't beat yourself up if that resource that worked for one student isn't working for you, right? I'm going to have resources that I share throughout the entire course with you guys. Your students are going to share fellow resources. CS50 is a great example, right? Where I don't personally recommend CS50 for a full stack web developer, but that doesn't mean that you get through this program and you go, I want to go into computer science. That's what I'm really interested in. CS50 is a great option for you then, right? I have nothing against CS50. I don't personally recommend it for the full stack developer path, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good fit for you or where you want to take your careers for this program, or even throughout the program. You may go through CS50 and be like, JavaScript made no fucking sense to me. I did not get it at all. I started going through CS50. The way Max is teaching it is ass backwards. CS50 makes sense to me. Share it with a fellow student, right? Totally great path to go down, find the resources that work for you. And if you are finding resources that are not shared, share them with your fellow students. If it works for you, it might work for someone else. I promise we will stop doing the motivational stuff. And that does end mostly today, if not this week. We do get to code. I promise it's coming.
Because of like the moment code started, I'm like, oh my God, when did I write on it too? And then it just over time it just gets easier. Like you're done with HTML, you're like, oh, okay, I'm just bad as all. And the JavaScript hits and you're like, okay.
This is bad. This is
really, really bad. Oh my God, I'm freaking out. And then everything else relies on JavaScript. Like majority of the things that you do rely on JavaScript. So my advice would be, please learn Java or really take JavaScript. Yeah, JavaScript very seriously.
that is the turning point. That is why your week 12 assignment is like a midterm. That is your moment to say, do I get this? Because week 12, there's nowhere to hide. You have to understand all of HTML. You have to understand all of JavaScript. You have to understand APIs of how to use one, not necessarily how to build one. And you need to pull it all together and make sure that's all talking together. So if that sounds like an exciting challenge for you, you are probably a great fit for this boot camp. Don't worry. No, we haven't touched the line of code yet. Some of you won't have to touch the line of code until week 2. That is okay. We continually turn up the speed while making sure that that level of understanding of the concepts is there.
And you will be very well prepared. With Max's instructions and the lesson plans, you will be very well prepared to actually literally do exactly what you said. Might seem like a lot right now, if you don't know, but you will be more than prepared to actually do it.
And we spend, what would you say, 90% of class time actually writing code?
Yes,
So,
and the other percent is explaining the code,
yes,
like him literally explaining line and line of code.
which
And
is,
that is the most important part of any of that.
which is very hypocritical of me spending the entire first week not writing a single line of code, but I promise it's coming. And this is laying the foundation for you guys to be able to dive in and really understand everything.
And the only advice, sorry, I keep on giving advice, but the only advice that I would really give, besides learning JavaScript really well, is please, if you should be able to literally explain your lines of code. No matter what, like even if you were to start a brand new project, right, with the concepts that you learned, based off of the concepts itself, you should be able to do an entire project by itself. Right? At the end, that's pretty much it. But you have to, if you can explain it, you can teach it, and you can do it.
Say, see one, do one, teach one. You're gonna see me do it, and you're gonna do it in class. Can you teach one? Could you pull in some random grandma on the street and say, you're gonna learn JavaScript, and sit them down and actually explain that code? That's the level of understanding that we're shooting for. Nothing against grandmas. I know a lot of them would be interested in learning JavaScript. Okay, one more thing, and then we're gonna get you out of here. I hate to tell you, I push it right to 8:30. I am typically very good about ending at 8:30 on the dot. And then I usually am around to stick around. So if any questions come up after class, I can answer them. If you have had absolutely enough of me after 3 hours, I don't blame you. If you have any questions, you can always schedule one-on-ones in Canvas. One thing we're going to watch is the software development lifecycle. The good news is you do not need to hear me. You don't need to hear my voice anymore. This is